What's up, guys? Today I'll be talking about the War Within, World of Warcraft's latest expansion, specifically about the campaign and story beats. I'll talk about my experience, some others' experiences, and a few thoughts I have about the expansion so far. If you're new to the channel, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to. I work really hard on these videos all by myself, and without further ado, let's just begin. Also, spoilers for the campaign and our story. I want to start off by saying that I like the campaign from a game design perspective. I'm also not a game design expert, but I think people are entitled to their own opinions. It does a nice job hustling the player through each area while also taking moments to explore each zone a bit. This is especially nice since there's some players out there, like my own friend group, that don't really care about the campaign and story and really just want to get to endgame so they can, gear for PvP. For the zones, I think it's a great idea for them to be on two different layers. The Isle of Dorn feels like a proper starting zone with lush green fields, quaint villages and locations, and a few monuments to visit and look at. Dornagal is also a really cool city and is massive, which I am a fan of, because in the past I've really liked Zandalar, Suramar, and Valdrakken, to name a few. When I was playing, going to the other zones via the core way really kind of took me off guard in a good way. I was traversing the Isle of Dorn still when I thought, hey, weren't there supposed to be other zones? Like the Arathi zone, the one with the weird troll night elves, and like a spider Nerubian zone? Going down the coreway was a pleasant surprise to say the least. And the new zones also look fantastic and feel really scenic, especially the parts when you see Hollowfall and the City of Threads for the first time. My favorite zone probably is Hollowfall so far, and I'm really enjoying the vibe of it. It's almost like a high dark fantasy type of feel. Overall, I think Blizzard really nailed it with the zones. Now, let's talk about the leveling and pace of the campaign. I was slightly disappointed with the overall pacing, for myself at least. While it definitely felt faster, like I said before, which is a plus for some people, it might have been a little too fast. I think with modern campaigns and MMOs, they should take you to max level either at the end or a full or half zone before the end. When the game integrated the first delve and the first dungeon, the Rookery, I was fully excited. My immersion wasn't broken, and the mini stories in each fit well with what was going on in the campaign. Like in the Rookery, where you had to fight all of the corrupted Storm Riders, and after Baelgrum talks to you and straight up admits that he won't be that much use since that we just took out a bunch of his own Storm Riders, like that was really great. From that point, I fully expected each zone's dungeon and a delve or two to be, fully integrated into the campaign like that, but that expectation wasn't met. Instead, delves were separated into easily missable side quests, and dungeons were silently unlocked and could be viewed or queued via Group Finder. I think that was a missed opportunity for Blizzard. I've seen some complaints that I've also made so far where people ask, "Well, why don't players care more about the characters in the story so far?" Well, this might be one of the reasons. If Blizzard could incorporate the characters from the main storyline in dungeons so players could see them more in action, then it would help with 1, keeping players immersed, and 2, building a connection between the players and the main cast. With the newer follower dungeon mode, they can even take a note out of Final Fantasy XIV's book and let the player queue up with the main cast of characters, each having their own unique interaction with the dungeons. For example, I queued the Priory of the Sacred Flame dungeon, and when I got there, I honestly had no idea who any of the characters were. I get that they were probably important NPCs within the Hollowfall faction, but other than that, I had no stake or connection to the characters. This got a bit better when I queued for the Stone Vault and faced off against the former High Speaker Eric, but that's the only reason I knew the NPC was because he was physically introduced to us as a villain, and formed a connection with him because, well, he was actually pretty well written and funny. I think for upcoming releases, Blizzard really needs to make sure the players are immersed the full time they are in the campaign or at least in the main story quests. I honestly think a better formula would be to, follow the Final Fantasy XIV recipe, lead with story quests and cutscenes, and then integrate the dungeon during the climax of the zone or at the end of the zone with either a setup for the next one or with a solid ending that shows the players where and what each NPC is going or doing. I personally think this formula creates really satisfying and immersive experiences for players, and if WoW can put its own spin on it with its amazing lore and characters, it'll be much more successful. Now, let's talk about the story. I actually think the story is quite good. It continually ups the stakes on each story beat and does a really good job introducing and bringing back characters. In my opinion, none of the new characters felt shoehorned in or obvious plans for future plot points, but felt like actual grounded people with their own motivations and goals. I'll go through the campaign in chronological order instead of skipping around because it feels right and I don't want to confuse you or myself for that matter. So first, the teleportation of Dalaran. I think this was overall an interesting choice since this would now be the third time Dalaran would be teleported during WoW's history. When I was writing this script, I was trying to think of other ways we could have gone to the Isle of Dorn. Obviously, in past expansions, we've taken portals, boats, jumped into the afterlife, etc. But actually, since this expansion is more focused on the inner workings of Azeroth, I think it would have been more interesting if we could have gotten there in one of two ways. Number one, and the more unlikely one of the two, is to take a deep run tram style journey there. I think something like the Darkhind Dwarves finding an ancient tram under the Eastern Kingdoms and getting it to operate would have been really cool, or a tram being unearthed from the area around Sargeras' sword in Silithus would be cool too. From there, players and allied forces could ride the tram all the way to the Isle of Dorn, but be attacked by Nerubians and Xal'atath along the way. There could also be a cool way of progression where the players might need to start at the back of the tram and work their way up to the front to fight a boss, and then crash or stop the tram only to be in one of the new zones, which would probably be Ash Kahet, and then would have to be bailed out by Baelgrim and taken to Dornogal. This would have come full circle when we dive back in and have to work our way back through Ash Kahet towards the City of Threads. For number two, this makes a little bit more sense in my head for me since we're focusing on the Void so much this expansion. So this way would be Illyria and her Void forces could transport the Horde and the Alliance through Telegris Rift and, Void hop pretty much to the Isle of Dorn. I don't know what the actual mechanics of Void travel are, but I think it could happen and it would also fit the theme a lot more. While we're in there, we could also have the same things happen as in the other example, the attacks from the Nerubians and Xal'atath, and the same things would pretty much happen. As a quick aside, I have played all the post-campaign quests, and I will put those thoughts into a separate video because, boy, I do have some thoughts about it. Anyways, moving on. So going from this, I think the destruction of Dalaran and the death of Khadgar, well, quote-unquote death of Khadgar, were insane elements to the story. Insane meaning both good and bad. Khadgar's death served as a good catalyst to kickstart Illyria's revenge tour against Xal'atath, but it felt so quick. I know it was probably meant to show how strong Xal'atath has gone since BFA, but I mean, really, Khadgar is the current Guardian still. Other than his Kamehameha that he did, he really didn't show much else in the terms of magical diversity. I would have expected Khadgar to be almost like a Doctor Strange or a Gandalf, wielding all sorts of spells and abilities, but we didn't see it at all for this character's final farewell, which makes his death feel very flat to me. In fact, I was more upset that Dalaran got blown up, since it made me think about what would happen to the other two instances of Dalaran in the Crystal Song Forest and in the Broken Isles. Are those instances gone? Who's maintaining them if they're mirages or illusions? That's kind of a loose thread in my opinion. Like I said, both of these events were insane in their own right, but they had a great deal of shock factor to, really draw in players into the campaign. I know I literally just made a Marvel reference, but it's like the beginning of Infinity War, when Thanos beats all the Asgardians in Hulk and kills Heimdall and Loki. It raises the stakes of the story so high at the beginning, and it gives the audience a sense of urgency to see what is going to happen next. From here, the players start their journey on the Isle of Dorn, repelling Nerubian attacks and helping out the Council of Dornogal find their missing members, because their leadership is fractured right now. I don't really have any complaints about this exposition, and I actually think Blizzard did a good job moving the players along while giving an expansive history of Dornogal and its inhabitants. And as a side note, I also love the additional dialogue you can listen to throughout the campaign. It gives so much more life and realism to the characters and their surroundings. So during your time helping Dornagal, you're often accompanied by Baelgrim, the resident Giga Chad of Dornagal. Well, he's actually the Storm Ward, but he's so Giga. Oh my god. Well, anyways, I love the currently existing Griffin Riders, or I guess the Wildhammer clan, but this new slash other iteration led by Baelgrim really took the cake for me. The Stormworks they write are so sick, and honestly, the fact that they don't have Scottish accents makes them pretty interesting too, and feel pretty normalized to me. I also really like that they say like new directive or edict in almost every single sentence. Anyways, you keep traveling with Baelgrim to find the Stone Ward of Donegal, Adelgon. It's here where I think players really start to get invested in the storytelling, since this is where we get to see the start of Baelgrim's short but meaningful character arc. Basically, he's mad at Adelgon for abandoning Donegal and her duty to repair and fix the city. But Adelgon is mad at Baelgrim for trying to still enforce these edicts and directives when there's other Earthen outside of the city who need their help. This is also where players get introduced to the Delve progression system. And after healing the Earthen in the village, Adelgon agrees to come back and help the city, while Baelgrim apologizes and realizes there might be more to serving Donegal than his prime directive. Then we get a really funny scene of him getting carried away by a ram. We then go to Cindermead Brewery, where we find out there's going to be a massive Nerubian attack. Obviously, we can't let that happen, so we play Bloons Tower Defense until Zitrix, the Nerubian we kind of fight near the beginning of the campaign, and it's apparently super strong, comes in and starts ravaging the place. And in the most Giga Chad way, Baelgrim jumps from the top ropes and explodes the damn place. But what really got me with Baelgrim's sacrifice is what he said before. It was because his directives and edicts were so strict and the fact that he was so rooted in them that it allowed him to recognize it was time for a newer generation of Earthen and edicts to take his place. It wasn't that he realized his time was over, it was that he realized that his time needed to evolve to further advance and protect Donegal. And with that, Blizzard has managed to make me care about a character we've known for legitimately an hour. After the Cindermead incident, the coreway is finally repaired and we go down to the Ringing Deep zone, the first of Khazalgar. It's a great looking zone that's reminiscent of the Mines of Moria from Lord of the Rings, but a bit more steampunk and an area totally dedicated to kobolds and their candles. The stone vault exterior area reminds me of the Obsidian Citadel from Dragonflight, which, gives me a little bit of mixed feelings. But anyways, when we land there, we meet up with Machine Speaker Brinth to see what's really happening with the recluse leader of the Machine Speakers, Eirik. Eirik? It's one of the two. I think I'm going to speak with Eirik. Yeah, Eirik. Now, nothing could have prepared me for the scene where we meet Eirik, but I was actually laughing at the absurdity of his introduction. Well, first, he's sitting on a throne, but that's not really the crazy part. The crazy part is that he's being dragged by other Earthen on a railway track, but they can only go one way. So in my head, they're just dragging this dude in a circle around the zone while he rambles about whatever. Speaking of rambling, Eirik feels like the corny villain in a parody superhero movie, and I am absolutely here for it. He's so dramatic and over the top for a machine speaker, and the slight awkwardness when things don't go according to his timing and plan is pretty funny too. 10 out of 10 character, good job Blizzard. So basically, in the Ringing Deeps, the player has to go around and help the disconcerted citizens who are upset with how Eirik is running things, and the questline here ends with Eirik deposed and running away and locking himself inside the stone vault. It's not a very complex storyline, but it's done pretty well, and we finally see Skarden in the game. We also see Magni being released from his duties as the Speaker of Azeroth, due to him saving and freeing a bunch of inert Earthen from being turned into Skarden under Xal'atath's influence and Eirik's influence. I'm very interested to see where the whole Magni storyline goes, and I know there's a quest in the game about him and Dagran going to find Foebreaker and whatnot. I haven't finished that quest, but I'm super excited to finish it. So yeah, I'm excited to see where the Magni storyline goes. So after the Ringing Deeps, we are sent to Hollowfall. Hollowfall, like I've said before, is easily my favorite zone in this expansion. I love the vibe and the ambiance, and the giant void light crystal Belladar in the sky is awesome. And now, the story of the zone is also pretty simple, like the Ringing Deeps, where we have to just fight the evil Void faction and keep them from corrupting the big crystal. But this time, though, we have Anduin for the ride, who has famously lost his light through various traumatic experiences in the past. We're also accompanied by Faerun Lothar, who I can only assume is a descendant of Anduin Lothar, one of the old great heroes of the Alliance, which is also fitting since Faerun and present Anduin share a connection throughout the zone's storyline, as she teaches Anduin that the light doesn't simply leave a person. Illyria also appears in the zone, but is actually a little more antagonistic or standoffish in nature, as she basically tells Anduin to not really get his hopes up for the light to return, and yeah, she's kind of just really rude throughout this entire time. We eventually defeat the Void faction from corrupting the Sacred Flame, but then the Nerubians attack again. Wow, shocker. So from there, we start saving various Arathi and start sweeping a path through the Nerubians. And then we eventually get to an area where we have to make our way to an escape blimp. As we're casting off, Anduin notices a giant ballista aiming at the blimp, and then heroically leaps down and seemingly sacrifices himself to let us get away. This is a key moment in his arc so far, where, like Baelgrim, he realizes that light isn't necessarily a tangible power at all times. It can also be the light of passing the torch to others down the path. With Anduin overwhelmed by Nerubians, assumedly, the rest of the gang set off to go bring the fight to Ashkahet, which is the final zone of Khazalgar. Unfortunately, we get shot down and have to fight even more Nerubians. As we're fighting, we see a humanoid that looks like a cross between a night elf and a troll that helps out just a little bit and then runs away. We track them down to a big blood pit and discover their name is Orwenya. The player is alone at that point, so basically Orwenya tells us to survive the pit and just straight up dips. We fight up the pit and we get a glimpse of Orwenya being scolded by her people, and then they all just kind of leave. This is the last time we see them during the campaign, so I'm a bit disappointed by this tease, but hopefully they'll play a bigger part during an upcoming season, patch, maybe the raid. I'm really hoping we see them again because they look pretty cool. The player then makes their way to the Weaver's Lair, led by a cute little dude named Spindle, who I really want to be a pet. Please, Blizzard, let me have a little spider guy. We already can get a little octopus dude. I just want the spider guy. Anyways, we meet the aptly named Weaver, also known as Widow Arachne, which is, I think, really funny because it sounds like Arachne. But anyways, the Widow wants to dethrone the current queen of the Nerubians, Ansarek. The Weaver disagrees with her choice to ally with Xal'atath, and also the fact that she murdered her mom. The Weaver was also the former royal Weaver of the palace, so she has some stakes in this. The Weaver then tells us we need to gather allies to even stand a chance against Ansarek and Xal'atath. We then reunite with Faerun at a small encampment so aptly named Faerun's Advance, and hear rumors of a man who has somehow survived in one of Ansarek's military establishments. When we investigate, we find Flynn Fairwind. Flynn Fairwind. How did he get here? Why is he here? I appreciate seeing the homie from Borellis as much as the next guy, but this cameo straight up just caught me super off guard, like super random. Anyways, Flynn has been stabbed and wants his swords back, which is kind of understandable, so we go get them, along with some valuable intel about Ansarek and the City of Threads. And then we stow away in a really small shipping container and get hand-delivered at the feet of General Anubaza, who unfortunately kind of wants to join us against Ansarek for his own purposes, and then sends us to do some errands with Gazlo. Yes, he somehow made it here too. We then round up Gazlo's gang, who has been imprisoned by Zevkal, a ruthless Nerubian under Ansarek's command, and then rub Zevkal's pheromones all over ourselves and escape out the front gate. That's just an actual plot point. We then part ways with Gazlo and then head back to the Weaver, who then tells us we've been invited to the City of Threads to meet someone named the Vizier. The Weaver tells us that this is an opportunity to gain an ally within Ansarek circle, so we go, and lo and behold, we not only meet the Vizier, whose name is Executor Nizrek, but also Anduin, who survived because, hey, what do you know? Not all Nerubians are bad. Illyria is obviously not too excited about potentially taking the Nerubians as official allies, but Anduin tries to convince her that they're good people too, under their own circumstances. During this, however, Illyria catches a glimpse of Xal'atath during a speech from Ansarek. Illyria fires an arrow, much to literally everyone's dismay, and now we have to escape the City of Threads. Now, I want to kind of break this down really quick, just because I have some mixed feelings about this. So, I kind of do and don't like this moment from Illyria. While I think this probably was in character for her at this point, I would have hoped that she would have had at least some restraint. When this happened, I was immediately reminded of Tyrande when she went all warrior of Elune. While the character concept is great, which is, the empowered warrior hunting on the one enemy that caused catastrophe, seeing it again feels just a little bit stale. Now, going back to the escape, the actual gameplay of it wasn't actually very that hard, except for that one part where it's just like one small hallway with a bunch of random AoEs. I was stuck on it for like 10 minutes before I realized I could just mount and just run through the whole thing. Yeah, I just wanted to share that with real quick. Moving on. So after we escape, Illyria actually stays behind to confront Xal'atath and her minions. Surprisingly, Xal'atath offers Illyria to join her as a quote-unquote monster. Illyria then flashes back to companions throughout her journey, Turalyon, Khadgar, Anduin, etc., and chooses not to give into the darkness that she is so readily originally accepted. She then strikes Xal'atath by literally kind of like gut punching her, and then leaps off the terrace, following Anduin and the player. Immediately retconning my statement from earlier, this moment from Illyria is fantastic in my opinion. She's tempted with absolute power, and also in front of the enemy she has been hunting down. She's already seen her love Turalyon shake in fear of her darkness, and her scent has already grown without her. She watched her friend and his city explode, so what else does she have now? Drawing from her previous experiences and determining what the future might hold, she holds fast to her humanity and turns away from Xal'atath. Absolute cinema. From here, we basically just unite the severed threads, which are the 3 Nerubians that we've recruited, and then head back to Dornogal, where we inform Moira that we're now getting ready to fight Xal'atath. The players then could play the post-campaign quests, which I mentioned earlier, and I will make a future video since I have already played through them and I have my own thoughts about them, especially the endings and stuff. So I have also more thoughts about just the campaign in general, more specifically about the Castle Gar zone, since I already kind of spieled about the Isle of Dorn in the first half. So my only real complaint about the Ringing Deep storyline was that the story with Eirik didn't continue. Like I said during the gameplay section, I just wish the dungeon was mandatory so we could wrap up that story thread. And with Hollowfall, also no real complaints, but I wish we dove deeper into what the Crystal and or Bellador was. I'd also want more actual in-game context about the Arathi, their migration underground, and just more lore in general about the Lightkeepers, because they're super sick, and I would have preferred the storytelling to be more in your face and through the campaign, because I think I've seen some videos about a lot of this lore being either in different like collectible books that you can read in the map, or maybe also uh in random side quests. But yeah, no, I just prefer them to be super in your face about it. Now, Ashket is where most of my complaints are. While it's very cool we're uniting a sort of loose alliance of Nerubians who have their own goals, it mainly feels like we're their messenger and like errand child. The quests also feel very cookie cutter and mainly rely on cameos such as Flynn and Gazlowe. My main issue, though, is with Anduin during the zone, surprisingly. He just felt like he reverted back into MOP or BFA Anduin, where he kind of just fully trusts strangers with no regard for his own safety. I thought he was going to be more on edge this expansion, which we got a glimpse of during Hollowfall, and then was slowly returning to being that trusting guy who wields the light during the end of the expansion. But instead, I feel like his character progressed a little too quickly for me. That's my opinion, though. I also low-key don't like his reappearance at the end of Ashgahet 2. I think he should have disappeared for a while more, and instead, with the Vizier, have a different NPC. My preferred option actually would have been Thrall, since he appears in like all the loading screens, and he was like heavily marketed for this entire expansion, but he kind of just dipped on a boat back to Orgrimmar to go rally the troops. But my next best option would probably been Magni, who is fully flesh and is kind of experiencing the same thing as Anduin kind of at this point in the story. And I actually think Magni sympathizing with the Nerubians who oppose Ansarek would have also made sense, since he kind of saved the Earthen who were going to be under the influence of Xal'atath, so he would have kind of understood what they were going through. So this is how I would have kind of revamped the entire kind of final sequence in the City of Threads. So Magni would have actually appeared with the Vizier instead of Anduin, and we would still have that whole back and forth. Magni would be like, yeah, the Nerubians, they're actually kind of cool. They're being oppressed by Xal'atath and Ansareg, and Illyria still would have shot the arrow and whatnot. And then we would have still had to escape the City of Threads. Then during her confrontation with Xal'atath, that's when I would have had Anduin reappear. Like, this is the earliest I would have had him reappear. I preferred him to appear a little bit later, but I mean, if they wanted him to reappear during the campaign, then this is probably where I would have him reappear. So Anduin would reappear to not really save the day, but to assist and show kind of his character arc and progress. He would show up with a fully powered Charlemagne and using the powers of the light, since his noble sacrifice at that one Hollowfall place would have given him full perspective back into the light. And then his appearance would reflect more of his kind of like BFA / Shadowlands or early Shadowlands armor, and then he'd lose the really dreary cloak. He'd also be able to split Charlemagne in two, signifying that his willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good would, bring the light back into him, like I said before. He'd then land a solid strike on Xal'atath, much like Sarfang landed on Sylvanas. So we could have something reminiscent of that, maybe cut her eye or something, just like Sarfang did, and then inspiring Illyria to follow suit. Like, she could still have her flashbacks with Turalyon and everyone, and then she could still like gut punch Xal'atath, which it's still one of my favorite moments. But I think with that added inspiration and context, that would have been super, super sick. And then they would leave. And that's pretty much all the complaints / feedback I guess I have. But overall, I think the campaign was actually fantastic and a major step up from both Dragonflight and Shadowlands storytelling. The stakes were appropriately set. The main cast is pretty much fully engaged the entire time, except for maybe Thrall. I would have included Thrall a lot more in the campaign. Maybe have someone else go to Orgrimmar to pick up people, but I digress. And the world feels pretty alive again. I'm super excited to see what Blizzard has in store for the future. And like I said, that's all for me today. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and or subscribe. I spend a ton of time on these videos, and it would mean the world to me if y'all could help support, because I really have a passion for this. Thanks all. Peace.